And maybe the way in which I can express and start off by the phrase that's been on my mind recently. And the phrase is this isn't what I planned, God. Any of you ever wondered that within your life? This isn't what I planned. I'm thinking about Christmas as well. I'm not sure if Mary and Joseph really knew or imagined what they would have in mind for them when two angels of the Lord appeared to them saying, like, you're about to give birth to a baby, Mary, and this baby is going to be like the hope and the savior of the world. I bet Mary and Joseph thought, this isn't what I planned, God. For their own life. But maybe in some of your own stories as well, you've had the phrase, this isn't what I planned, God. Believing, and for me, believing and recognizing that God is for me, and God is for you, believing and recognizing that God is for us. And there's sometimes beauty in sharing our stories, and I know some of you have shared your stories, and I pray that you keep telling your stories. I think there's something powerful about telling our stories and telling the places in our life where we have thought, this isn't what I planned, God. For me, the scripture that is the foundation of my life is Romans 8:31, and it says these words, what then shall I say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? So my story begins in this way. I never imagined being orphaned at the age of 32. My story begins literally when I was a baby, naturally. On July 18th, 1991, I was born. I was born to an alcoholic and drug-addicted mother named Leslie. She had her own struggles for her entire life, and I was a product of rape, a product of a one-night stand gone wrong in my mother Leslie's life. And my mother decided at a very early age, when she was young, she decided to keep me and figure out how to raise me for her entire life, for our life. And this was indeed a difficult task for Leslie. She was young. She was dealing with her own trauma, her own addictions. And still to this day, I do not know who my dad is. I don't know who my biological father is. I don't know his name. I don't know where he lives. So most of my story this morning will really simply be telling the story of my mother. My mother struggled to remain employed for most of our life. We moved 14 times in 14 years because she struggled to keep a job, which meant she struggled to keep a place for us to live. We didn't have much growing up. We didn't have much money or a nice place, but just the bare bones at times. And really, when I think about my mother, when I think about Leslie, I think she tried her best, but really it was still a kind of a childhood of chaos. I spent most of my nights from the age of 9 on putting myself to sleep. I am proud of my independence today at the age of 33 and a half. And I think I learned that starting at the age of 9, middle school. My mother was deep into her addiction of drugs and alcohol, and this addiction required or allowed for her to travel all kinds of places. I don't really know what she was doing, but I spent then most of my middle school nights alone at home, where I learned to make you probably all know, the Nardoni square pizzas, right? So I lived on those when I was in middle school. I have not eaten them since I was in middle school, I just gotta tell y'all, but I still can remember getting out those square boxes of pizza. I would walk to school, I would get myself ready for bed, I would try to do my own homework the best I could, and I try to function well on my own. My mother dated whole kinds of people growing up, and some of the men that my mother dated were quite abusive to both of us. As I reflect upon kind of initial childhood, I think about it, it's sometimes hard. It's sometimes hard for me to think about the positive moments, right? I had this deep sense, though, that life was better or bigger than this, right? That my life would turn out all right, but I had no idea at the concept of 9 how that was going to be. But I always imagined early on, I remember, I was thinking about this actually within last week, sitting in one of the places we lived, just laying in bed, literally out loud, crying that there's something better had to be in this world beyond addiction and chaos and trauma. And there were fine moments, little moments, glimpses of hope within that. And my mother tried. I want to give her the credit. She tried to do her best, but she really struggled deep within her own self. But I had a grandmother named Joyce, my mother's mother, and Joyce, I called her Mimi, so I'm going to call her Mimi for the sake of the story. My Mimi, I don't know if she was a Christian, y'all. Like, I don't really, but she always had from like the earliest of age for me, she always made sure that I went to church. And so from an early age, she like would pick up me and make sure that I got to church. She had her own addictions, her own health concerns, but she wanted to make sure that like her only grandchild like had a different life. And so for her, the only thing she could conceptualize as a young child was to take me to church. So I went to church, and I, as Hannah already said, like I didn't grow up in a Christian home, I would say, but I grew up in the church. Like, friends, like, I'm going to go on record, and y'all might laugh at me, and you should, right? Like I think, like, I, like, love the church. And I might be, like, quite biased. Like, I literally think, like, the church is, like, the hope of the world. And part of it for me, the reason why is, like, the people, the harbor, there was safety in it. Like, I found belonging in the church in a place where I never found belonging. Like, I was loved in the church for simply being me. And that me at the time, growing up, friends, like, it was like a smoke-scented, talkative, obnoxious child who would run around the church desperately looking for someone, just if someone could give him attention. But it was the church, friends. It was like y'all. It was the people of faith, like, who helped me feel like belonging. So, friends, like, I literally grew up in the church, and what I mean by that is, like, every Sunday I went to 2 services. Like, on Tuesdays, like, I was in the bell choir. Shout out to the bell choir, y'all. I was in the bell choir, like, growing up. Like, praise team on, like, Thursday night. Shout out to the praise team people. Like, kids and youth ministry on Wednesday nights. But it was, like, my home church. Like, Christ Community United Methodist Church on the corner of Park and Fisher Road in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, who I would say saved my life. And I'm pretty, like, I would go on the record, like, I don't think I'd be standing here today. I would not be married to Hannah, and Lydia probably would not exist in the world if it wasn't for the people of God at Christ Community, a church that truly saved my life. The age of 14, it was a significant year for me in a couple of different ways. Age of 14, both of my grandparents, Joyce and my great-grandmother Miriam, both passed away within a few weeks. My mother was arrested for the 3rd time in 1 year, and she, when we were having some dialogue about where I was going to live when she was going to be incarcerated, because that was impending, she didn't like the ideas that I had for where I should live, so I vividly remember in May of that year that my mother kicked me out of our house. And I remember in that very moment walking to a payphone in our local town to call this random family from this church that I grew up in. And I literally kind of said, like, can y'all, like, pick me up? And can I come stay with y'all for a little bit? And that just began entering the foster care system. And so for much of my high school career, I lived in the foster care system, particularly with this single family. And 14 was the last time that I ever lived with my biological mother. But also at 14, y'all, I like accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior in downtown Harrisburg at the Hilton Hotel of all places. And I remember being on a youth retreat there as a freshman with all of these kind of guy friends from high school. And I remember, like, on Saturday night, y'all probably had this moment. You heard the preacher preaching some really compelling message that you just needed Jesus, and I, like, wept because I was like, I needed something. And for me, as much as I think about that moment, I desperately was longing for something different in my life, desperate than something I ever experienced at home. And I really, like, I would hear about this God who, like, would love me unconditionally. Like, if God is for me, who can be against me? What can separate me from anything? And they're like, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I was like, what are you talking about, Pastor? Like, I want some of that good stuff. Can I get an amen in the room, right? And so it was this preacher at 14 who just compelled me to, like, really want to, like, know more about this faith. And I knew, like, church. I knew what it means to do church. You come to do church, you stand up, you sit down, you pray, you, like, eat together, right? Like, you love on each other. But it was like this preacher who taught me about, like, Jesus and this love that Jesus would have for me, even as a young kid who just desperately wanted loved. And so it was my home church of Christ Community United Methodist Church who made sure I went to college, y'all. And it was my youth pastor in particular who I remember saying to her, like, can I go to college one day? And I'll share this later, but I'll share it now. Like, no Sledge. Sledge is an infamous last name in Selinsgrove, just an FYI. But no Sledge had ever graduated high school. No Sledge had ever gone to college. No Sledge has ever kept a full-time job for more than a year. That's not what Sledges do in Selinsgrove. And so for my youth pastor named Christina, who believed in me enough to make sure that I would help write my essays and help me go on college visits and help me get to college, it was my youth pastor who made sure I got to go to college. And gratefully, I went to college, Messiah, where I wasn't the best student. My college advisor is in the house right now, Dr. Jay McDermott. I was not the best student. He knows. And yet, I didn't figure out how to study until I was in seminary, but I figured that out then. But I would say this college was the first place that I wasn't known as the son of Leslie Sledge, right? I wasn't the son of a Sledge. This was the first place that I could begin to identify who I was, who I wanted to be. And I developed the best of friends in the world, experienced incredible things, traveled around the world, and really grew in a personal faith for me. A couple of things happened in college. The first happened in the summer of 2010, and maybe some of you know this. I was on a mission trip to East Africa, to Uganda. My home church has a partnership with this church in East Africa, right outside of Kampala, the capital of Uganda, in Bwaisi. And so we were on this mission trip, and a few of us decided that we want to stay in the country a bit longer, because why not? And so we decided that we wanted to watch the World Cup that was happening in South Africa at the time, that we wanted to watch the World Cup as a true African would. So we went to this local Ethiopian village restaurant, this local bar place, and we watched the final match between Spain and Netherlands at this restaurant. What we didn't know that night was the terrorist group Al-Shabaab was planning terrorist attacks across the city of Kampala that night. And so we were sitting at a table shape of an L, and we were sitting there. There were 6 Americans and 5 Ugandans, and we happened to have one extra chair at the very beginning, at the very top of our table. And so it was one of the situations in which at this restaurant there was this guy. One of my pet peeves, probably pet peeve for you, when people walk in front of a projector screen, especially when you're watching the World Cup in 2010, people are going to be screaming to telling him to sit down. And so we decided, as good Christian missionaries would, we have an extra seat at our table. And so we invited this random guy to sit at our table. Little do we know that night we invited a terrorist to sit at our table. And during the stoppage time, in the first half, a bomb detonated at our restaurant. And so mass chaos, as you imagine, people screaming. I remember trying to walk away, but only getting a few feet until I realized that I had significant pain in my body. In total, that night, 86 people had passed away, including 3 of my friends who were sitting at my table that evening. It's interesting, I'll say this isn't in my notes, but I'll give my commentary. That night in particular, we were at this table, but we were all moving around all throughout the dinner table. And so it's interesting that at that very moment, when the bomb detonated, we were all in different spots, and I was literally just directly behind the bomb. But gratefully, to not go into too many details, but we had plastic tables that we were eating at, which saved our life because they flipped up, disintegrated, and saved the kind of vital parts of my organs in particular. I spent 1 week in the hospital in Africa, spent 2 months at Hershey Medical Center, had 9 total surgeries, really for a variety of parts of my body. Had to take a semester off of college, which was the worst thing ever. And I really had survivor's guilt. Why did I live while 3 of my friends did not? That I struggled to understand God. And so I was one of those moments, gratefully to kind of beyond childhood for a minute, but only being 1 year beyond childhood. This was after my freshman year of college. And remember, my favorite place in the world, my safety in this moment was college. And now I'm having to stay home with my foster family's house, which was fine, but it was not the place that I love to be. That I remember questioning my faith and doubting who the heck was this God who would allow bad things to happen to seemingly good people, right? We have probably all wondered that question. And then that fall, when I'm sitting at home grumbling, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, I read this line from Romans chapter 8, and it's been a line that I've said once, but really the line I've never been able to forget out of my head, which is this: what then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, friends, who can be against us? And I remember reading, nothing can separate us from the love and the hope and the care of God. No, disaster or bomb or whatever happens, nothing can separate us from the love of God. And so I put on my faith pants again and tried to figure out who this God was. And yet again, it was the church. It was Christians. It was people like you all. Genuinely, it was people who wrote notes to encourage. It was college professors who were gracious. And really, it was the place of faith that allowed to continue to heal my wounds and pain and trauma. It was the church that helped me process. So between the age of 14 and I would say last summer, the summer of 2023, it was a journey of feeling a bit like trying to figure out who I was, who I am, and kind of it beyond just what my biological family would say that I am. That for 19 years, I lived with very limited biological connection. I struggled to trust myself. I struggled to trust others, right? Like I still have trust issues, y'all. So anyone, can I get a witness, anyone? Okay, 3 of you, yes, we're in this together. Because of that, struggle to trust people and in relationship with people. This is my notes. I married my favorite person in the world, Hannah, your pastor, in my mid-20s, and it's been a story of Hannah's incredible patience. Y'all, you have a patient pastor. She puts up with me. She's really, really patient, and has really been a genuine gift to me, and has provided the most security and consistency that I've ever had in my life. I found it in Hannah. And she's the most consistent presence in my life, and some days that's frightening. For a guy who has trust issues like me, it's terrifying. But it's Hannah and our relationship that we decided when we were getting married that we were going to keep my last name. We talked about that because y'all, Sledge is infamous in Selinsgrove, right? You go to Selinsgrove, you ask about those sledges, you're going to hear some stories, specifically from teachers in town, right? But really, it was Hannah and I decided, we're going to keep the last name Sledge when we get married, and we're going to give our daughter the last name Sledge when she's born. Because we want to be part of the new legacy, the redemption story of this last name. And Lydia, as you all know, is my first or second favorite person in the world. And really why I love Lydia so much, and you all know this, is she is the only person that I get to touch right now in my life that shares the same DNA as me. And so that is so important to me, and that's why I love being her dad so much. Now, I didn't grow up with a dad, y'all, so I don't know what I'm doing. So if dads out there, I'll take your wisdom because I love, but trying to figure that out. Let me end with this, telling this last piece of the story. Last summer in July of 23, I got the call that I knew one day I would get the call, but one day that I didn't know how to respond. And it was the call that my mother, Leslie, was having a medical event and I needed to get to the hospital in Danville as quick as possible. I knew what that call was. Probably some of you have got that call in your life. And I remember driving to the hospital, yelling and screaming. I'm not a violent person. I kind of think of myself as a pacifist. However, I was hitting the steering wheel as much as I could on that drive, y'all. I was just trying to get my emotion out because my relationship with my mother never got better since I left in the age of 14. We were at least communicating a bit over the last couple of years. She got to hold Lydia for one time when Lydia was a month old. And I remember over the last couple of years, 10 years, having to financially bail my mother out of jail every time she went to jail. I remember being her medical contact person, so anytime something went wrong, I was the one getting the call, but we had no relationship at all. And so when I got the call on July 25th, 2023, that I'd have to go to the hospital, I knew what that would require. After spending 24 hours by her side with a woman that I had not had depth of relationship with in decades, that I knew that my job in that moment was to love her in the way in which she always desperately longed to be loved. Then when I think about my mother now, when I think about where I'm at and where she was at in that moment, I think my mother's story of 55 plus years of life was she desperately wanted to be loved. She desperately wanted to be seen by others and yet struggled. She died after battling depression, addiction to hard drugs, addiction to alcohol for her entire life. She died, I would say, from a broken and lonely heart after a lifetime of addiction. And I knew I had the responsibility because of my faith, y'all. Because the Jesus who decided to be patient with me, who decided to be for me too, the Jesus who was willing to literally, as we say in our Christian faith, die and resurrect for the hope of the world, for the salvation and the healing, that my job was to care for her in the only way that I knew best, which my faith was telling me to do, was to clean out her apartment, to pay off all of her debts, and she had some debts, to eulogize at her funeral. And I remember vividly, and I just have to tell you this part of the story. It's I remember vividly, I was sitting in front of people who these were her druggy friends that were at her funeral. These were friends who I knew hated my mother's guts, but they were still there for some reason. And I remember saying at her funeral that I wanted my mother, Leslie, to be remembered for her best days, not her worst days. Because goodness, would any of us want to be remembered for our worst days? No. But we all want to be probably desperately remembered for our best days. And I remember that for me in that moment that I could put an end to that chapter of my life in the way in which my faith would compel me to, which was to love her and honor her, to give her what she desperately longed for her life. But I think it's fair to say this isn't what I planned for my life. But here's where I've seen the Lord in conclusion. Ever since my growing up, I always knew where my mother kept her alcohol and her meth. I knew exactly where it was in the house. I could tell you where her drug stuff was. But I think for the grace of God, I never once touched her drugs or alcohol ever. I could have, and I have friends who I grew up with as all of our parents partied together. I know where their life went. For some reason, I chose never to consume that. From an early age, from a young kid, I sense the divine presence within me and other people. I can't fully explain it, friends. I don't know, but I always deeply believed and sensed that the Lord was present and was keeping me safe and alive. The Lord protecting me from any potential harm that I could have done or could have happened to me. But it was the Lord. It was God. It was faith. It was the church that has been the most consistent aspect, and I believe what literally kept me to be here. And every corner, every lonely night, every hard situation, every moment where I felt abandoned as a child, there were moments of God, I think, were speaking through people, from rides to school, money for school stuff, right? School's expensive, y'all, and when you're a poor kid, I don't know how people do it, right? From clothes to my woman from my home church named Lynn Bloom bought me my first car, go Lynn. The people were there. And probably why I'm willing to give my entire life to the church. And while I'm willing to we're willing to be clergy couple and do this crazy things, I think that I deeply believe in the power of the church. I think y'all can literally save a kid's life. Maybe 1, maybe 10, maybe 100. Because I'm grateful that Christ Community United Methodist Church on the corner of Park and Fisher Road in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, saved one kid named Kris. Now, I would just say in conclusion, I don't think I deserve this. I don't think that I'm special. I have made all of my own mistakes, but I'm grateful that the Lord has been super gracious to me. That I get to be the first Sledge ever graduating from high school, from college, who has his master's degree. That I get to be a Sledge that has kept a job for more than a year, for many years. I'm grateful to that. I'm grateful to have a partner in faith. I'm the luckiest man in the world today. Now, my fear and my job is to not screw it up, but just to continually say thank you, thank you, thank you. So what should we say in response to all of these things? All of these things in my life and all of the things in your life that you have as well, your stories. What should we say in response to these things? If God is for you, who can be or what can be against you? What can separate us from the love of God? Nothing. Amen.